Kia ora and welcome to the Niggly Nishcast. It's the dog, Mr. Papatoe Panther, here for another episode with the Wobbly Wildcard, where we are going to quickly touch on the Auckland Blues and just their start to the Super Rugby Aotearoa campaign, and a few observations from around the restart of Super Rugby in Aotearoa, and then we'll spend the bulk of this episode talking about the NRL. Good win for the Warriors. Even the Wildcards Dragons bounced back as well against the Cronulla Sharks, and we'll go deep into some NRL matters. Twice a week, straight from the Niche Case, we do a email newsletter, so that is on Substack, so look for the links around there if you do want a bit of extra coming to you Monday and Friday through your emails. No bullshit, just the good shit. And also, if you do enjoy the Niche Case and want to support us directly, jump on Patreon. That is the best way to support us, and is always greatly appreciated. So shout out to our patrons. Big it up, big it up. Wobbly Wildcard. In the naughty north of Aotearoa, there was actually a Northland Derby in the NRL Wildcard, if you don't mind me throwing it up to you with that topic. The Dylan Brown, I believe he is half Samoan, half Pākehā from Whangarei, and his Parramatta Eels, they defeated the Penrith Panthers, who have James Fisher-Harris from the Hokianga region. I think he went to school at Whangarei Boys High School, and then Caleb Aikens from the wider Whangarei region as well. So shout out to the Northland situation, and shout out to you.
Yeah, sure. I'll happily put myself in that company. I mean, how often would there be little Northland derbies like that? Like that's spinning off into another idea now. Like I think obviously it doesn't take too much to figure that if you were picking like little state of origin region type things in New Zealand, Auckland would be quite comfortably the strongest one. But outside of Auckland, like where would you say the strongest region for NRL talent out of Aotearoa would be? Like, is it, I don't know, would Wellington be sneaking in there next? Would it be, some of those Manawatu fellas are pretty decent too. How would Northland stack in that as well?
So with specific regard to Northland, you've got Dylan Brown, James Fisher-Harris, Caleb Aikens, and Adam Blair. Elijah Taylor does have some Northland factors, but he's not really playing at the moment. And the other one is Corey Harawira-Naera. So thinking back to the Spring Internationals last year, and I've talked a fair amount about this, you had Adam Blair and Corey Harawira-Naera leading the haka for the Kiwis, and both have some lineage to the Ngāpuhi tribe up north. And so I was frothing at that, just seeing like two dudes from the same tribe, same background, same region in Aotearoa leading the haka was pretty cool. And I was looking forward to James Fisher-Harris getting involved in that. So you'd have Fisher-Harris, Corey Harawira-Naera, and Adam Blair leading the haka all together. That would be amazing. But Harawira-Naera got into some strife over the off-season. So now I think it's just four: Adam Blair, Fisher-Harris, Aikens, and Dylan Brown. With regards to Aotearoa, I think it is Wellington. So you've got, this is straight off the top of my head, so I'm definitely going to miss someone, but Joseph Tapine, Danny Levi, Renouf Tu'uamanga, who is with the Bulldogs. He's another sneaky little Wellington player. You have Jerome Hughes with the Melbourne Storm, Nelson Asofa-Solomona from the Melbourne Storm. That's about it off the top of my head. Christchurch, not so many. It's only really Jermaine Isako holding it down at the moment. There is always enough for a, because I do actually do the Battle of Aotearoa I think I've done it the last 2 years. So around the time of State of Origin, I do a Battle of Aotearoa and I name a Tamaki Makaurau team, which is the Auckland region, and then I name a Aotearoa team, which is the rest of Aotearoa, excluding the players from Auckland. So, yeah, obviously you're going to have decent numbers from Auckland, but even then, like, you've got Shawn Johnson's from pretty much Orewa. So I count that as Auckland, and Brandon Smith, he's from Waiheke Island, so I count that as Auckland, but those are two key playmaking positions who could bolster the Aotearoa team. And then you've got other players like Jazz Tavanga, who was born and raised in Christchurch, but then moved up to Papakura and stuff like that, so in Auckland. So hopefully that answers your question somehow.
Yeah, pretty much. A nice little overview of the various talent regions. It's pretty because I don't think that's necessarily something that people think about when it comes to rugby league. Like on a surface level, I think most people just sort of assume that the majority of the players coming out of Auckland, that's where the Warriors are based, obviously, don't necessarily realise just on a sort of surface level Kiwi sports, what you might see on the telly news at 6:45 or whatever, kind of, those kind of opinions. Maybe wouldn't realise just how diverse the regions are in terms of supplying just top quality NRL players.
For sure, and there's little pockets like Tokoroa, you've got Zane Teravano and Joseph Manu. You mentioned the Manawatu. I can't think of anyone in NRL from the Manawatu region right now, but there is someone like Jackson Ferris, who is he was a junior Kiwi, and he's on the fringe of the Cronulla Sharks top 17. But I hold that thought, Wildcard, because in my list of little talking points here, as part of the Warriors wrap, I do have just bouncing back to the idea that I think Phil Guild came out last week and said the Warriors have the pick of the talent in Aotearoa. Because the Warriors are the New Zealand Warriors, everyone in Australia just assumes, and everyone in Australia, Australian folk just assume that the New Zealand Warriors automatically have selection of the best players in New Zealand. They have all of New Zealand to pick from, which is, it's not necessarily a lie, because I don't think the people who say this in Australia actually understand or know the truth. So it's hard to say it's a lie, but it is a illusion. It's a myth. It's like the big Warriors forward pack or the Warriors offloading. It's one of those footy myths that I do want to touch on when we do talk about the Warriors. So just hold that thought there, Wildcard, and we'll start with some Auckland Blues Super Rugby thoughts and ideas. It was an interesting mind. We are both Blues fans, so we're feeling like we might touch on the Blues over the next few weeks as Super Rugby Aotearoa does roll on. But it was a weird little dynamic wildcard, because I was watching that Blues game and I had, both of us, when we're watching these games, obviously we're born and raised in Aotearoa, so we are partial to a bit of rugby, but we don't cover rugby. But watching the game, you do have insights that I think a lot of other people might not have, and that gets you excited to talk about it. So I had that feeling. I was Sunday afternoon footy. That's a fantastic thing that we'll touch on as well. Watching the Blues, watching jam-packed Eden Park, good vibes, good footy. Insights are flowing through my mind about different players and all sorts of good stuff happening in my brain. Get a bit of hype, get a bit of, fizz going in my loins, thinking about rugby, and then pop on Monday morning and all the mainstream media, the whole first half of the bloody sports pages, all rugby. And that just reminded me of our purpose with the niche case. So yeah, it is about expressing our views a little bit, and we won't write about rugby, other than a couple of minutes on the podcast where you might find no rugby with the niche case, and that's because it's just completely saturated in Aotearoa, and the excitement after watching that Blues game, they defeated the Hurricanes, quickly evaporated when you just look at the mainstream media and just how much, once again, it just seems like a lot of it is bullshit. It's just wall-to-wall coverage of rugby. So that, if anything, to get us started here, Wildcard, it reminded me of my purpose in covering Kiwi sport, that our primary focus is to celebrate Aotearoa as a sporting nation. All different sports. We are the greatest sporting nation in the world. We are the greatest creative nation in the world, KG for KG. And our purpose here for the Niche Cage is to showcase that, and showcase that Aotearoa is not just a rugby nation. Aotearoa is a fantastic sporting nation all round, and we don't put rugby on the pedestal within Aotearoa that the mainstream media does. So definitely going to touch on some Blues stuff here and offer a few deep cuts. But yeah, more than anything, it just reminded me of our purpose here at the Niche Cage, and seeing the saturation of rugby coverage, which absolutely made me yawn.
Yeah, it's just a little. Well, hey, let's not pull any punches here. There's a lot of bootlicking involved when it comes to these kind of things. Like, it just sort of seems like fawning to the wider, not even to the wider public. It's just like fawning to what people think people are supposed to be like in New Zealand. Like, you got to be a big old rugby fan, and that's why I sort of watch when I do watch rugby, and I don't watch a lot. It's probably the first. I watched both those games on the weekend. Probably the first two I've watched all of 2020. All Blacks haven't been on this year or anything like that, so it's been a little bit of a clean slate. But ordinarily, Super Rugby not particularly enticing to myself. Having said that, bloody enjoyed both those games. All the excellent spectacles. Getting the crowds in was just the most incredible thing after everything that's been gone through. And I think you can probably add the old. Along with being the best sporting creative nation on the planet per capita, whatever, like, we're probably also the best pandemic response nation on the planet. So chuck that one on the old certificate as well. So the whole spectacle of it was what caught me. I didn't really, I generally, because I take a little bit of a step back when it comes to watching rugby, I tend to also watch it from that step back, and then I can get a little bit cynical about things like Justin Marshall yelling out just borderline like Forrest Gump without the heart type level statements. Like, what are you even talking about? Is that even making... he said something, I can't remember what it was, but there was something he said about like microsecond. That was it. He was talking about the microseconds during a game, and I'm like, seconds are seconds. Like, it's a measurement of time. You can't have a different measurement of the measurement. You can't have like 1 centimeter is smaller than this other centimeter. Like, that's not actually physically possible. There's a little bit of a weirdo. I don't know where he got his physics degree, but Facebook University probably. And like, that can sometimes cloud the way I also watch the games, as I don't, another reason why I probably don't watch them that much is because I don't particularly, it's not that much fun watching and just being cynical about things. But like, there was not a lot to be cynical about watching. Like, just two really entertaining, high quality games. Few too many penalties in the old ruck with the, what do you call them? The rule changey majiggy thingies. Don't know why both NRL and Super Rugby felt the need to go weird with game-changing things, but at the same time, you could also say like it affected the flow of the game in a positive way in other aspects. So like, just good entertaining rugby. I'm surprised to be able to say that in the year of 2020, but I guess everything else has gone wonky this year, so that might as well.
And watching the Blues, and the main takeaway was that there was a lot of Beauden Barrett. Not necessarily, and this is where it gets really interesting, in thinking about the Blues specifically, because when I watched the Blues and I, on the Sunday afternoon, I saw all my insights came from players who weren't Beauden Barrett, but all the attention was on Beauden Barrett, and all I saw Beauden Barrett do, which is kind of good, like it's a good classy touch, was when the Blues are kicking for touch, Beauden Barrett would kick for touch with a tempo. So he would quickly kick for touch instead of the Blues taking 2 minutes to suss out their plan and suss out their strategies and their next couple of plays that they were going to roll out. Beauden Barrett, being like from his history with the All Blacks are pretty damn good at this and raising the tempo, pushing the tempo, Beauden Barrett would take the kicks for touch very quickly, get the Blues moving. Obviously, that impacts the fatigue that the opposition's under, especially when the Blues are stealing multiple lineouts from their opponents. So they're stealing possession away. When they get a penalty, they're playing quickly, kick for touch, get up there to get the lineout done. Whereas the Wellington Firebirds were a bit slower, but generally just less cohesive. But I say all that to say that that's literally what I saw Beauden Barrett do. He didn't have a real, maybe some goal kicking, but he didn't goal kick. It was Terry Black. So I just struggled to see like now that's not, obviously Beauden Barrett's world class, and Beauden Barrett, this was his first game back for the Blues and all of that stuff. So I wasn't expecting a swashbuckling display from Beauden Barrett necessarily, but to me it shows the insights and education that comes like from the rugby coverage, because I don't necessarily, and this is where I get excited because I think I can and we can add to the conversation around rugby, in the sense that all the attention's on Beauden Barrett, everyone's focusing on Beauden Barrett, where there's less attention onto how the Blues were actually winning the game. All Beauden Barrett did was some classy touches in kicking for touch, but then I look at like what the Hoskins Satutu dude was doing in the Blues forward pack. I look at TJ Faiani, who is consistently solid. Like anytime I watch the Auckland team play, or anytime I do watch the Blues play, TJ Faiani is just consistently 7 out of 10. But then you get these extra classy touches. He put a grubber in for the left winger for the Blues, can't remember off the top of my head, but he like carried the ball all the way into the line, and as he was getting tackled, he puts the grubber in. That is the class that you would usually associate with the Beauden Barrett type. But TJ Faiani's just, rolling it out in the midfield, and I think someone like TJ Faiani, and to a lesser extent Hoskins Satutu, like Satutu gets a lot of recognition. Like he was doing some great work around the ruck, and just his mobile, his skill, he's a massive unit as well. But there's players in that Blues team like TJ Faiani, or like Ofatonga Fasi, or even Goodhue, old mate Goodhue coming in at lock as well. There's players in that Blues team who are key players, crucial players who are just steady and had far greater impacts on that game than Beauden Barrett.
Yeah, Caleb Clark was the left winger, for the Blues. I'm pretty sure was son of All Black Ronnie Clark.
Yeah, Caleb Clark. So on the other side, you do have Talea, and then left wing Caleb Clark, son of Ronnie Clark. And they said the Hoskins Satutu is the son of Waisaki Satutu, who used to play as well.
Yeah, there you go. It's always been one of those things that, how you're saying about the Warriors copping it for, like, supposedly having the pick of players from around New Zealand, which is not really a fact whatsoever. Whereas the Blues, that's probably something that's been more accurately thrown at them over recent years, particularly when they're struggling. I mean, it's harsh because it's like if you got so many players to pick from, you can't pick all of them, right? You gotta like select some, and if those players that you do select aren't coming through to the highest level, and the ones that you miss are, well, then perhaps maybe it's not your scouting that's the issue. Maybe it's your coaching and your pathways and stuff like that. Like there's, in the very least, it could be. So it's one of them little balancing acts. And one of the criticisms that's probably been fairly thrown, I would suggest, at Auckland Rugby is that it favours its own a little bit too much. It like picks out of the same major clubs. I think Auckland Cricket's probably had this, certainly from speaking to people involved outside of the main couple central clubs there. Like Auckland Cricket's had similar things, and it's a tricky one to balance because it's like, is there a little bit of nepotism or favoritism involved? Perhaps, but at the same time, like it's that same thing, you can't pick everyone, so the ones you just got to like trust yourself that the players you bring through, regardless of the pathways or whatever, are going to be the right ones, or going to at least be successful, whether right or wrong. There's no right or wrong. It's everything comes down to application and all those other various things. Like you just got to trust that you can bring the best out in players, and if you don't do that, then you open yourself up to criticism, and if you do, then you don't. If you do, then you don't. You know, that's getting good results out of, and also like, I mean, you got to also chuck in the Beauden Barrett signing from a similar perspective, because that is a big name signing. It is like a lot of pressure on his shoulders. So even if he didn't do a whole lot in that game, and I don't think he did, like I thought, Ochere Black was really the focal point for them in a good way too. Like it's kind of what you want. If one guy's taking the attention, you need the other people to succeed in the space that they allow you there for. And like Beauden Barrett just being a classy All Black is probably, but also like not pulling all the strings, probably the best thing for that team. Like it loosens up the pressure on other players, but it also allows them the freedom to do what they do best. That seems just like a all-round positive thing to me.
I would throw up a general idea, especially moving forward, how Beauden Barrett is portrayed and covered versus how Ardie Savea is portrayed and covered. Because I do think there are some differences there. Like Beauden Barrett is your quintessential Pākehā All Black. Everyone loves him. Darling of the media, darling of the Women's Day and the Women's Weekly. Very good at rugby. Everything is what Pākehā Aotearoa loves. All the white people in New Zealand, they just love a Beauden Barrett coming up on their screens. And then Ardie Savea, obviously there's a racial implication here, that's what I'm alluding to. He is someone who, and I will come back to Super Rugby because I do want to know like which player for you is like a standout with the Blues, so keep that in mind and we'll come back to that. It is a very interesting situation because you look at Beauden Barrett, very prim, proper, by the book, you know, Pākehā All Black and all those things fit into the ideals, especially of the mainstream media, beautifully. But then you look at Ardie Savea, and obviously he's a Samoan. That is part of this, but it's not all of it, because Ardie Savea is someone who is taking his own power into his own hands. He's got his podcast, he's got a little clothing label. He is leading the way in a lot of topics that are far more important than the stuff Beauden Barrett's reporting on. You know, whether it's social media influencers or just, you know, those kind of things. Ardie Savea is speaking and leading matters that are important to the well-being of young Kiwis. And that's through his podcast and interviewing different people and just how he's taken control of his platform and his voice. To me, it's far more admirable. And I'm a Pākehā Kiwi. I draw far more inspiration and leadership from Ardie Savea than I do Beauden Barrett. And then you have maybe a couple months ago, Ardie Savea went on the Ice Project with Isaac John, who is the guy who founded YKTR, played in the NRL, played for the Warriors, and Ardie Savea kind of just, you know, off the cuff, just saying, yeah, I'd love to play NRL. It looks cool and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And then the situation blows up back in New Zealand because, heaven forbid, Ardie Savea wants to go play in the NRL. And that took it to another level. So I do want to throw out that situation moving forward. Just be aware of how Beauden Barrett is portrayed by the mainstream media, given all the factors that go into who he is and what he represents in Aotearoa, and then pay attention to, side note, I'd strongly suggest you pay attention to what Ardie Savea is doing, because he is a fantastic leader for young Kiwis, but then pay attention to how Ardie Savea is portrayed. And it's a sub-layer of funk there, is you've got two different people who, one is very corporate, one is very by the book, and then you've got another one who is pouncing on all the opportunities that are available in 2020 through social media, through podcasts and YouTube, and the platform he does have, expressing his opinions using that platform, which in a way goes directly against the mainstream media. So I think that is a fascinating back show to what we have. So Wildcard, you can either bounce off that, or you can just get into who stood out for you in that Blues team.
I'll give you a bit of both. I mean, like, the thing, like, this, it's not a criticism of Beauden Barrett either, like what you're saying, which is 110% true. Like, it's just jarringly obvious those things exist. And maybe if you're a bit too close, you don't see those and you come up with excuses or whatever. The point, though, I mean, not the point, the reason for that is because, like, you know, Beauden Barrett's just being who Beauden Barrett is. If he doesn't want to speak up or have, like, interests beyond rugby, that's fine. That's his own, like, choices. It's just the platform and the prominence given to him as opposed to someone else who is a more critical thinker, a challenging speaker as well, and just generally a better speaker. Like, to be honest, Adi Sevilla hosts a podcast for a reason, because he can hold a conversation, whereas a lot, like, Beauden Barrett's just your typical kind of, like, well, that I don't even need to go beyond typical. The typical sums it up right there. Like, he'll have a laugh. He won't take himself too seriously. He'll play well when he's on the field, sort of thing. And all of that adds up to a figure who is very non-threatening to your general sort of, like, Kiwi boomers, right? And that's pretty much why, like, those people have a big say in the rugby media, but just in the rugby community in general, like, going far beyond media reaches, in a way which maybe other sports aren't as sort of, like, tethered to that old school kind of thinking. And you know, Beauden Barrett has a tidy haircut, and he's you know, there's nothing fussy going on about him. He's nice and blah blah. Well, bloody nice and white would probably be a way which people wouldn't admit to, but that's kind of what they're thinking when they talk about him in that kind of way. So, it is a very obvious kind of, like, comparison, and perhaps I don't know if I'm digging a little bit too deep here and trying to pick at scabs or whatever, but you could almost like, I think it goes beyond media representation as well. I think Adi Sevilla for a long time had to work harder to earn his spot as a starting All Blacks player, even to where now, like, I mean, you could even say that he should have been in the I would have had him in the conversation as a potential All Blacks captain. I'm not criticizing Sam Cane, because I think he also did the apprenticeship and very much was, like, the next guy in line, which is the way it has been done. Like, Kieran Reid was very obviously going to be the guy to take over from Richie McCaw as well. But they play in similar positions, Adi Sevilla and Sam Cane, and you could argue Adi Sevilla was like borderline the best All Black last year. I mean, if that's the case, then suddenly Sam Cane is the captain, perhaps not even the best player in his own position. That also, like, that in itself, like, that sort of thought and this other thought we're talking about, comparing, like, the way he's portrayed, individually those two things are their own things, but when you put them together, like when you apply the fact that both those kind of situations have arisen, perhaps there's a little, like, you know, it's just a little more evidence to chuck in the old case file. You might also want to counter-respond to that, but I will say, on your question of players that stood out, it's very hard to go past old mate from Kerry, Tom Robinson. Big, like, stands out in a number of ways. I thought he was, like, just a player who's really enjoyable to watch because he's all energy. He's always involved in the rucks and the lineouts, doing what he does, and also stands out just physically because he's a tall ginger guy with long hair. So always enjoy watching that fella play, and he's seeing him for Northland the last couple of years is also, although he didn't play for Northland last year because he was injured all season for the old, whatever they call the NPC these days. But yeah, so Tom Robinson is a fella that always has stood out in recent years to me.
He's only, according to his Wikipedia, I would say is correct as of 31st of October 2018, so I won't refer to his
He needs
It
to
says
sort that out.
he's only played 12 games for Northland. I was like, shit, that's a pretty dramatic rise.
I think he had 2 seasons, I think.
Yeah, well, as correct as of 31 October 2018. So, I was tripping out Wildcard. I was tripping out watching that because you had Robinson with his ginger hair, you had Satudu with his blonde hair, you had Sam Nock with a blonde mullet, you had the little Finley Christie, another ginger halfback. Like, you know how, like, you can, I don't know how you watch Sport Wildcard, but there's, you know, whether it's you look at the head first or the body shape, you know, when you're watching sport on TV, there's somewhere where your eyes go just to suss out who the players are in a situation. Obviously, all of this is happening in a quote-unquote microsecond, so it's all happening very fast. But when you're watching a sport, especially rugby or rugby league, where you've got players all together in a close area, you need some like key identifiers or just things that are going to help you quickly understand. Especially like we're writing about sports, so it helps if you know who the correct players are, which absolutely does my head in, especially watching the NRL when the commentators just blatantly get it wrong when referring to a player. Like they'll say this player's name when that player did something excellent. It's just identifying the player is like your primary objective when commentating on sport or reporting on sport and writing about sport. So I'm watching like the defensive lines in a ruck, and you're just seeing all these different colors of hair. And it's like some of it, obviously the latest trend is the bleached hair, and that's cool, but it's also like you've also got, I think Tui Peloto had pink hair, and then you've got a couple of gingers. Like it's like you've got the natural variety, and then on top of it, you've got the trendy variety with the pink hair and the bleached hair. It was a absolute rainbow on the footy field. It was beautiful.
Yeah, it's like everyone spent their lockdown watching The Last Dance, and you'd think you'd come out of just, you know, a whole bunch of like Michael Jordan shaved heads, but no, it's Dennis Rodman who's had the pick and pack day, which is beautiful to see. The Dennis Rodman episode of that Last Dance documentary was my favorite of all of them, and the Dennis Rodman character is the one where it's like they could have gone so much longer just focusing on Rodman and all his contradictions and all his like wildness, but his misunderstoodness as well. And like it's fascinating character. Glad to see him getting his due and across various sporting paddocks around the world at the moment, which is bloody cool. I look towards when trying to because player identification when you're trying to write about stuff is bloody hard sometimes. Like sometimes it's obvious, and it's really, really bloody helpful when you get like distinctive haircuts or body shapes and stuff like that. Like that helps enormously. I try to if I'm watching a game of football, I try very early on to over the first 10 minutes, when often there's a lot of like sussing each other out and not necessarily crazy action, I try to pick the formations and place the players within the formation, so I know like if you're going up down the wing, it's probably going to be the left winger or the left fullback or maybe a striker drifting over. Like, try to identify those things, and then player numbers come in pretty handy after that. Although it's not always easy to be able to tell, especially in rugby and in rugby league. It's not always easy to be able to pick the number, especially if someone's like lying on their back or something after a tackle. You know, so it's one of those sort of sly sports writer kind of tricks of the trade, is how can you figure out who's who as quickly as you can so you don't make the mistake? Because the worst of it, I mean, it's one thing in commentary, which is frustrating when they get it obviously wrong. The most frustrating, well, it's not even frustrating at this point, it's just straight up silly and stupid, is when like newspapers get it wrong with like you've got a photo of the wrong person afterwards or the caption wrong. It's like, you're not on the clock right here. Like, you're not speaking off the top of the dome like live on TV. There's no excuse at that point for not having like the right fact check. And the best one I've ever seen was when Romelu Lukaku did something, and it was reported on like the back page of the Sun, which, as far as like English shit rags go, the Sun is the worst of them. And instead of Romelu Lukaku, they had a picture of the rapper Stormzy. So I don't know how you can possibly get things that wrong, but incredibly, people still do.
They sure do, Wildcard. Just to wrap up the Blues discussion here, you mentioned, what's his face, Mr. Robinson. And other than TJ Faiani and his role in that midfield, because no matter, I think there's going to be a few, it's a niggly backline to try and figure out. They were playing with Rico Ani at centre. Obviously having Talea and Tianelu Talea and Caleb Clark on the wings was working out well, so that makes you think we should keep Rico Owani in the centres. You've got all sorts of different first 5'8". You've got Otere Black, Stephen Perofetto, who did spend time at fullback earlier in the season, Harry Plummer, Dan Carter, Beauden Barrett. So there's all these fullback centre type of players. So I can see a Blues backline that it may be tinkered with just to get, fine-tuned details, or they may just keep things settled. Regardless of what the plan is with the backline, what the plan is with Otere Black and Perofetto and Beauden Barrett and all of that, TJ Faiani is going to be in the backline. TJ Faiani is going to be wearing the number 12 jersey. So at that stage, TJ Faiani is the focal point of the backline. Obviously, you're going to have more commanding players, but in terms of a consistency week to week, having Faiani playing in that midfield is just something to watch out for, given it looks like they have plenty of other options around Faiani, but just keeping Faiani there is someone to watch out for. And so you mentioned Tom Robinson. When you're looking at building a rugby forward pack, you want what the Blues have. Dalton Papali'i, young, mobile, loose forward. Who's the other guy? Blake Gibson, young, mobile, loose forward. Hoskins Sotutu, big, powerful, mobile. Patrick Tuipulotu, big, powerful, mobile. Robinson works his ass off. And they all have skill. They've all got mobility. And I think this Blues team is going to be built around the not the tight five, but the loose five, maybe the loose five, if that's a term as well, because their loose forward crew, along with the likes of Goodhue and Tuipulotu at lock, I think is going to be highly impactful for the Blues moving forward. Wildcard.
Yeah, who's this Dan Carter fella that you mentioned? Is he another one of them local up and comers?
The most I can say about Dan Carter's a bargain. There was a lot of talk from the Dan Carter perspective about giving back and whether the Blues signing Dan Carter. Oh my God, that's epic. Having Dan Carter and Beauden Barrett, it's just a matter of financials and situation. Dan Carter, kudos to him, because he's making very little money, I imagine, and he's fitting into whatever salary cap situation they have to have. Not sure if Dan Carter's going to play a whole lot, especially if you've got the younger first fives that they have. But when you're talking about value for money, and the role Dan Carter can have in the careers of some of those young first fives and the younger group that the Blues do have, value for money, it's fantastic signing, and it obviously suits. Dan Carter is kind of based in Auckland, I think. Lives here with his partner Honor Dillon, former hockey player. Dan Carter really kind of started the rugby hockey relationship situation. I don't really know. Shout out Dan Carter doing his thing. And shout out to rugby. We'll wiggle our way over to the Warriors and the Cowboys. Warriors had a good win over the Cowboys, winning 37 points to 26 wild card. And we will start with this idea of the Warriors having the pick of talent in New Zealand, having all of New Zealand to choose from. And that ties into a rugby conversation, because there's less players. Rugby doesn't really recruit from rugby league systems. Rugby league does recruit from rugby union systems for sure. But a lot of the players in rugby league systems do have rugby union backgrounds, so it is possible for the rugby union teams to recruit those players, because if you're a young lad in Aotearoa, you're growing up with a certain set of rugby union skills, especially if you are a footy player. But so the Warriors, so there's this idea from many people across the ditch that because the New Zealand Warriors are called the New Zealand Warriors, that means they have the pick of all the footy talent in Aotearoa, and that's just simply not true. And it starts with the fact that rugby union is still far bigger than rugby league in Aotearoa, so many of the better athletes go the rugby union route. Now, I have said that there is I think it's a quicker pathway to a more professional point in rugby league, as I've alluded to a lot over the last few weeks. Rugby union, it takes a bit longer to be a professional, to be earning professional money, and to be living straight up and down as a professional rugby player. So that works in favour of rugby league, but we need to remember that in Aotearoa, rugby union starts from a far more advantageous position. So it kind of evens it out. Yes, there is a quicker pathway to a greater professional realm in rugby league. However, rugby union starts from a more advantageous position. So it does even things out a wee bit. And so the Warriors, one Warriors team, they are also competing against all the Super Rugby teams and all the rugby provinces in Aotearoa as well. So in terms of having the pick of, players who can do both, like there's a number of Warriors SG Ball and so SG Ball's under 18 and Future Warriors under 16. There are a number of players, especially in that Future Warriors squad, who are part of the Blues under 16 system, who are part of the Blues under 18 system. So that shows you the level of competition for the talent. Like the Warriors, there are players in the SG Ball team who are playing first 15 rugby this year as well. So that shows the level of competition. And at some point, those players have to choose. But the Warriors are competing for just straight up and down footy talent with all the Super Rugby teams. Now, things get especially weird when it's someone like Phil Gould with the Penrith Panthers, he established a relationship with Northland Rugby League. That's why Fisher Harris, Caleb Akins, and Corey Harawira-Naera all went to the Penrith Panthers, because Phil Gould himself established a partnership with Northland Rugby League to get rugby league talent, up-and-coming rugby league talent from Northland to the Penrith Panthers. So Phil Gould's coming out saying, New Zealand Warriors, they've got the pick of all the talent in New Zealand, they should be a lot better, when Phil Gould himself has recruited talent from Aotearoa. Now, sure, he may just be exposing a weakness of the Warriors' recruitment and talent, but there's only so many players the Warriors can recruit at a junior level. Like, you don't want to have 10 different Future Warriors teams. That's stupid. You don't want to have multiple SG Ball teams. That's stupid. You can only have, X amount of junior teams, so that you can only have X amount of junior talent. And Phil Gould himself made the most of the opportunity. Now, every NRL team is recruiting talent straight from New Zealand. Every single NRL team is doing it. And they're doing it at a very young age as well. Like, whether it's intermediate tournaments, they're scouting them from there. Like, Jason Taumalolo had, I think he might have done a bit of third form at De La Salle, but he was scouted in intermediate school. So the Warriors, they have to compete against all Super Rugby teams for just straight up talent. Then the Warriors also have to compete with every single NRL team for talent in New Zealand, because all the Australian clubs are recruiting from New Zealand as well. So as someone who consistently writes about the Warriors junior pathways, consistently write about the Warriors recruitment strategies and ploys and how they're changing year from year. The Warriors are competing against 5 Super Rugby teams, and they're competing against 15 different NRL teams. So that's 20 different professional sports organizations that the Warriors are fucking trying to compete with just for talent from Aotearoa. So anytime you hear this idea of the Warriors having a pick of all the rugby league talent, just the rugby league talent in Aotearoa, that is a straight up lie, because many of the best rugby league players from Aotearoa, they're already in Australia by the time they're 16. So it's just this illusion. Again, it's not a straight up lie from these people in Australia, because they don't necessarily know what's happening. Whereas it's more of an illusion and just this myth for the Warriors. And if the Warriors had first dibs on all the talent in Aotearoa, there wouldn't be any Australians in the team. You wouldn't need to fill out your roster with Australians. But the Warriors, since 1995, have always had a couple Australians in their team, varying degrees of Australians in their team. Why is that? Because they're just part of the system. They're just another team competing for talent. Let alone all the European clubs who, like, you could say, oh, the Warriors, they could sign like a Atini Nanai Saturo. He is feeling frisky with his contracts with whatever. I think he plays for the Chiefs. I'm not too sure. But his New Zealand rugby contracts, he's feeling a bit frisky. You could say the Warriors want to get him back to come play rugby league, because he was part of the Warriors junior system at one stage. But, however, I've said all those Super Rugby teams competing to sign Atini Nanai Saturo in this hypothetical situation. All the NRL clubs might be competing as well. Where's the money in rugby union? Oh, that's in Japan. That's in Europe. So all these European clubs, all these international clubs, they're going to be sniffing around for any available player in New Zealand, because everyone in the world knows that the best rugby players tend to come from New Zealand. So suddenly you've got international teams, let alone the Super League, let alone whoever else wants a extra bit of talent. So to say that the Warriors have first dibs or first pick, no. You can say that the Warriors should be doing a better job of their recruitment and identifying the talent. I can agree with that. But you can't just say that they have first dibs. No, like, everyone has the same amount of dibs. Like, whoever's putting the most effort and energy into recruiting a player from the back blocks of Christchurch, or there's a guy from like Invercargill or Otago, Rory Ferguson, who was recruited by the Broncos. Like, it's whoever is putting the most effort in, but also it's situation. Like, if Melbourne Storm come knocking on your door and you're Nelson Asafa Solomona and you've got offers from the Hurricanes, the Warriors, like all these different clubs, and if the Melbourne Storm come knocking, well, I'm going to go with the Melbourne Storm. I'm going to choose the Melbourne Storm, but it's not about who has first dibs. It's who has the context around their club, who has the best development system, who has the best culture, who's going to put me in a position to succeed, because right now I can choose where I go. I can choose the best position for me, and I'm going to choose the Melbourne Storm. So I hope, because my intention there was to explain that it is a bit of a myth. It is an illusion that the New Zealand Warriors have first dibs and first rights on all the talent in Aotearoa. So anytime you hear that, give it some thought. Give it some think about all the talent in Aotearoa and all the professional teams in Australia and New Zealand, and the reputation of rugby, of Kiwi rugby and rugby league that is around the world, because you could be an average player in Aotearoa and be fantastic in different parts of the world, where you're going to be earning plenty of money as well. So the Warriors aren't that high on the pecking order. They do get some of the best young talent, and they've got some of the best young talent right now. And they've rectified a few things, but it's a completely different label in doing a better job of recruitment versus, oh, you've got automatic pick, you should be better, you got first dibs. That's a myth. That's an illusion.
Because if recruitment was an exact science, then we wouldn't have to talk about it at all. You know, like it wouldn't even be a conversation. It'd just be a matter of fact. But it's not, and you don't know which players are gonna develop into the top quality, and you can't always predict all sorts of things, off-field things that could happen. Just player could have a big old growth spurt late in their teens, and then suddenly they're a whole different prospect kind of thing, and you miss them initially, and there's too many variables for this to be the kind of thing where you can judge a team by it anyway, like just regardless of all the other factors and the competition that the Warriors are having. And I think generally, when you look at the players, like there are a lot of great New Zealand players who don't play for the Warriors in the NRL. Like that's a fact, and it's a fact for the reasons you just went into, which is that other teams are also scouting these guys very young, bringing them through, putting them in their systems, bringing the best out of them and whatever. But if you actually look at players who the Warriors had in their systems and left to become better players elsewhere, first of all, a lot of those players come back eventually as well. You think of someone like Peter Hiku's the first one that comes to mind. But there aren't that many. There aren't that many ex-Warriors who have gone on to do better things elsewhere. For the most part, the ones that they stick around, they're getting the best out of them, or they just didn't get to that point anyway, which is its own issue, but that's not a matter of recruitment. And also, you putting the pressure solely on the Warriors in order to be able to retain or just to sign all these guys in the first place takes out the takes out the free will of the players, for example. The players don't necessarily want to go to this situation if, the one you mentioned with the Melbourne Storm, if the Storm are knocking, you're probably going to go to the Storm. You're going to want to go to the club that has one of the best rates in the NRL of bringing through good players and supplying, that pipeline towards NRL success. You're going to look at that and think, well, okay, I would like to play for the team that's based out of my own country. That would be nice. But I also have to think about my career and what's going to put me in the best situation going forward, and where am I most likely to be able to play first grade as well is another factor. And there's too much that goes into it in order to simplify it to such a bland thing of saying this is a problem that the Warriors aren't dealing with properly. There's just too much else going on, which does remind me of something I was thinking of about how some of the Wellington Phoenix recruitments have gone. I just wanted to something I'm thinking of writing later this week is having a look at the players that they have signed out of the Premiership, and just looking at the success rate of that, spurned from something Aaron Clapham said on the Between Two Bears podcast recently as well, where he just talked about how completely underrated, this is in itself a topic for a whole other podcast, but how completely underrated the National League is in New Zealand. When you think about completely is, put some inverted commas around that, but still, it's compared to, it's not going to be the Premier League or anything. The players are getting a little bit of money, but for all intents and purposes, it is an amateur competition, and yet it's supplied players for example, just to chuck out the best and brightest. Roy Krishna came through that pathway to get to the Wellington Phoenix. Roy Krishna won the it's the Johnny Warren medal, isn't it? For the equivalent of the Dally M award for the A-League last year. The dude who came through amateur football in New Zealand, having come over from amateur football in Fiji before that. So that is in itself seemingly enough of a thing. But anyway, I digress. I want to save some of that stuff up my sleeve for when I actually do come around to writing about it. It seems like it's not a coincidence also that Phil Gould would be the one to say something like that, because Phil Gould seems to have a lot to say, and when Phil Gould isn't talking, other people seem to want to talk about Phil Gould. And just over the last week, with the fallout from the Dragons' 0-4 start, which is now 1-4, and you chalk them up, like, I saw articles saying that Phil Gould is the answer. They need to bring in Phil Gould to sort everything out. And Phil Gould was there in the off season, putting through a bit of a sort of, what would you even, almost like a rugby league audit of the club. And then Phil Gould had all these ideas and the club didn't go through with any of them. And that's why they're in, like, the amount of times Phil Gould's name came up in all those articles is driving me crazy. I don't know. He's a powerful man, old Gouldy, isn't he? So it goes.
Well, I'll save you.
Yeah, chime in. Go for it.
Don't get too deep into your Dragons words there. I'm glad you did mention the football. Don't worry, we will get to the Warriors in a second here. It's quite convenient because yesterday I was listening to another episode of the Howie Games. And they had Kevin Muscat, I think, was his guest. And Kevin Muscat must have just got a job coaching in Belgium.
Yeah, I believe he did. He was coaching Melbourne Victory for quite a while before that. And yeah, one of the dirtiest players who ever lived, Kevin Muscat.
Yeah, so once you get past, like, obviously we both watch a lot of A-League football, so once you get past that aspect of who Kevin Muscat was and move past that, it got really interesting. So he was saying that the biggest problem in Australia is the lack of respect Australians have for Australian football, which is the exact same thing you're talking about there with the New Zealand football and the quality within that country. Like, he laid it out that Australia was pretty damn good at football, and the systems that Australia have produce a lot of very good footballers who compete at the highest level, whether it's the Australian international team or whether it's individuals as players. But in Australia, it goes back to the idea of having a foreign name and having foreign ideas. And then he also got into the interview process for manager of Belgian First Division A team Sint-Trudenise, and having to break down the barriers, not racial barriers or like ethnic barriers, that's a bit dramatic, but being from Australia. So being from Australia has a certain tone to it when it comes to football. So how can you be an Australian football coach coaching in Europe? Like, we're the bastions of football. So yeah, I just thought that relayed to your idea around the New Zealand football and the perception within the country about the strength, because I agree with you. Like, some of again, Aotearoa is the best sporting nation, KG for KG in the world, so it's not surprising, but to hammer it home, the football talent that comes out of Aotearoa is absolutely astronomical, considering like the population base and the standing of football in Aotearoa as, one of the bigger junior sports, but not necessarily. Like, the local premiership has its niche cult following, but it doesn't command attention from casual sports fans. But the talent that is in that competition and that is exported out of Aotearoa, and then also a three-pronged thing here, because you've also got the Phoenix competing in an Australian competition. All of those three prongs, the local premiership, individual exports, and the Wellington Phoenix, all three of those different prongs, pretty fucking good.
Yeah, I mean, you look at just the success rate of the players coming through is all you need to know. Like, and it's interesting that Kevin Muscat would say that about Australia too, because it's true. Like, when I think about it, but I mean, Australia even more. At least we can say, like, we haven't done a whole lot as a nation in the 2010 World Cup, which is the 10-year anniversary of this week, actually, that group stage. But apart from that, like, New Zealand hasn't done a whole. Australia has. Australia is qualifying for every World Cup these days now. Like, they're pretty competitive when they get there. Like, that's a strong team. They've got Premier League winners. It's kind of crazy, but it's also football in Australia has always been kind of like filed away in a subgenre of like the immigrant sport. Like, a lot of it's not a well, we don't need to actually get into all that because it'll be a whole other rabbit hole. But yes, it's strange, and because even like we can say for football in this country that it's a sport which has traditionally not been able to capture the wider public sort of thing, and there are remnants of that and things that are working through, even as we look at the absolute quality of some of the players over the last 5 years, and then coming through, but over the next 5 years it's going to be even more so. It's only heading in one direction, and hopefully it's breaking down a lot of those boundaries. I think the 2010 World Cup actually probably did shift a lot of people's mindsets just on a more mainstream surface level again. But yeah, you got to be able to crack that audience if you want to be taken seriously. And I think football is slowly getting there. But I mean, even you think about a sport like cricket and how much we've achieved and how important a place cricket plays in the national sporting landscape. And then you go to a Plunket Shield game and there's, if you're lucky, 20 people in the crowd. What is actually going on there that this thing is getting this stepping stone which has provided all of our best black caps. No one else is coming through any other kind of avenue. One or two players that have come through, even if you think about players who have the odd Grant Elliott type come from South Africa, you still got to naturalize yourself playing Plunket Shield, and you where is the interest? Where is the love sort of thing? Where's the bluntly as you can put it, where are the crowds?
They're reading about it on the niche case.
Well, we're doing our bit.
Radio Wildcat, let's touch on the Warriors and we'll see how much wider NRL conversation we get through. I don't really care. But I do have a lot of what I believe are important Warriors ideas to express here. Good win over the Cowboys, generally speaking. I don't know, and this is a theory that extrapolates out to a couple of other games. The Broncos were pretty good in bouncing back from their dramas. They lost by 2 points to the Manly Seagulls, but I don't necessarily view that as a massive positive for the Broncos. The Seagulls,
they blew an 18-0 lead. So.
Yeah, and the Seagulls were a bit, hotchy-potchy, and then closer to home for you. The Dragons got a good win, and you have to, I think the most important thing when viewing those games is you have to emotionally respond. And both the Broncos and the Dragons emotionally responded with correct attitude, correct efforts, correct just energy levels. And that is kudos. That's part of the problem. And they solved those problems. So that's good for them. But then watching the Cronulla Sharks, I was just very disjointed, minimal attacking threats, and it was a bit all over the show. Perfect recipe for the Dragons to get a win. And I got a similar vibe from the Cowboys. Valentine Holmes goes down injured. Yeah, Tamiso Habasai Fido was pretty damn good. Wow, that kid moves. Looks like a natural baller. Valentine Holmes looks like a pure athlete, whereas Hamiso Tabuai Fido looks like more of a natural baller in the sense that he's just a natural footy player. So when I say baller, it's athletics. It's athletes and athletics. So I don't know how good the Cowboys were. I did highlight Jason Taumalolo's tackle count wildcard. And before this game, the one game Jason Taumalolo had made over 30 tackles in, the Cowboys had lost. The Warriors forced Jason Taumalolo to make 53 tackles. That is the most tackles he's made of his 4 games he's played this year. And now, of those 4 games, the 2 games in which Jason Taumalolo has had to make over 30 tackles, the Cowboys have lost. Now, that's just a purely results perspective, but things get a bit more interesting. We're looking at a stat that I haven't checked today, but prior to the last round starting, Jason Taumalolo had the most post-contact meters of any NRL player, and he had only played 3 of 4 games. He had a game less than the other players. So I'll just share this wildcard. Tackles made along with Taumalolo's post-contact meters. So round 1 versus the Broncos, Cowboys lost this game. Taumalolo made 32 tackles, and that led to 69 post-contact meters. The 2 games that the Cowboys won against weaker teams, the Bulldogs and Titans, Bulldogs forced Taumalolo to make 19 tackles, and that led to 115 post-contact meters. Titans, they forced Taumalolo into 16 tackles, and that led to 127 post-contact meters. The Warriors forced Taumalolo into 53 tackles, and that leads to 56 post-contact meters. So there's a direct correlation between Taumalolo's tackles and his post-contact meters. More tackles, less post-contact meters. However, there is also a connection between Taumalolo's post-contact meters and Cowboys' results. The 2 games in which Taumalolo has over 100 post-contact meters, the Cowboys win. 2 games that Taumalolo has less than 70 post-contact meters, Cowboys lose. So that tells you a lot about Taumalolo and the Cowboys. It also tells you a lot about the Warriors. Like, they clearly put a target on Taumalolo in the defensive line, and it worked out fantastic. It was excellent for the Warriors, and there were good performances across the board, but I believe the work of the forward pack was far superior to the Cowboys. And I've got different individuals here to highlight, but we'll get you a vibe from the Warriors and just dealing with Taumalolo wildcard.
Yeah, I mean, I thought he looked pretty clearly still a little bit injured. Like, they maybe rushed him back because he's such an important player for them. I think because he'd missed the previous week. He said he only played 3 of the 4 games. But at the same time, like, you got to take advantage of those things when one of your opposition's best players is maybe not at 100%, and in this case it was 2 because he had Val Holmes as well limping. He lasted quite a while, but he was limping crazily for most of it. It was kind of, at one point you're like, this is kind of mental. Why is he still out there? But you know, Warriors, I think Roger Tuivasa-Sheck is even on record as saying, like, they specifically targeted him to make Jason Taumalolo make a lot of tackles and just tire him out. He might not have 100% capacity with his energy in a game like this if he's not fully fit, so we're going to make sure that what he has, he uses on the defensive end, and he's not just rolling us through the middle. And perfect game plan. That's exactly what they needed to do. It's exactly what they did. And they got the old bennies from it. So there you go, 2 more points on the board, pretty much.
Yeah, I want to be really clear because there was a couple of ideas like, oh, Taumalolo looks gassed. I saw that, like, different comment sections or whatever. And it was Taumalolo's first game back. But if a man of Taumalolo's stature is making over 50 tackles, he's going to be fucked any round. Taumalolo coming off 10 games, if he has to make 53 tackles, he's going to be gassed. Like, the situation around Taumalolo didn't feel as important as the concept of the Warriors in making Taumalolo make 50 plus tackles. If that makes sense. Like I think this was and it's a recipe for other teams to perhaps grab an easy 2 points against the Cowboys. Like, if you've got a forward pack who can just isolate Taumalolo into 40 plus tackles, let alone 50 plus tackles, I think you're going to go a long way. Given I don't see much oomph elsewhere in their forward pack, you're going to go a long way to winning that game. So I think it was nice that Taumalolo was coming back in his first game back. Obviously, a bit of fatigue and those things, so that did help the Warriors. However, it's also a big up to the Warriors in actually making Taumalolo bust his ass to make 53 tackles. So I found that very interesting. Adam Blair's been very good for the Warriors. Like, some of these running meters for the Warriors, Adam Blair, 16 runs and 157 meters. Now, that is a tad below the 10 meter per run mark. No one imagines Adam Blair taking 16 runs and averaging 10 meters per run. That's not in anyone's imagination about Adam Blair, but he's out here doing it. And then guys like Jermaine Tanoa-Brown, 15 runs, 178 meters, well over 10 meters per run. Lachlan Burr was pretty good. Elisa Katoa was pretty good. Tohu Harris, fantastic in the middle. What happened? Tohu Harris update. Tohu Harris started on the edge as per the team sheet, but what happened this week, wildcard, was Jack Murchie got subbed on around the 20-minute mark, I think, for Tanoa-Brown, and then Jack Murchie moved to the right edge, and Tohu Harris went into the middle. So we did discuss that dynamic last week, and Isaiah Papali'i got dropped, so it was all a bit confusing. Suddenly Jack Murchie emerges as a edge forward for the Warriors, which is quite interesting because Isaiah Papali'i is just an in-betweener. He's not big enough, he's not fast enough, but he's big enough and he's fast enough, but he's not bigger than anyone else. He's not faster or more mobile than anyone else. At least Jack Murchie is similar size to Tohu Harris, and he's mobile enough to deal with like a half coming at him, a centre coming at him, but he's a bigger body out on the edge as well. And yeah, that's just an update on the Tohu Harris situation. Before it was just a straight Papali'i starts on an edge, Tohu Harris starts in the middle. Against the Cowboys, Harris started on an edge, and then Murchie came on to play right edge, and Tohu Harris played through the middle, and I think I counted 3 play the balls from Tohu Harris that led to a try in the next play. And Tohu Harris also threw a pass to Nikorima that set up the Petahiku one-on-one carve-up of Isan Masters for one of his tries. So Tohu Harris had not necessarily a direct impact, but at the very least, he got quick play the balls from which a try was scored on 3 plays, and then threw a nice little 10-meter pass to set up another try to go with 15 runs, 17 runs, 193 meters, 80 minutes, 42 tackles, 97% tackling efficiency. All those stats are amazing, and he had to play the balls that led to tries, and he threw a pass for a try. So that's why Tohu Harris in the middle is so important. The extra wrinkle this week was that we got Jack Murchie playing on the right edge, and I'm loving this Warriors forward pack, just how it's looking, wildcard.
Yeah, Tohu Harris, since the restart, so that's 3 games, he's been just in the most scintillating form, eh? He's just been so good. And
but that's only coming through the middle.
Yes, and that's been the little secret weapon, hasn't it? And because they keep naming him each one of those weeks, am I right? He's been named on an edge, but he's either played through the middle or in this week, little bit of funk involved in starting on one side and then moving in. But for predominantly, he's he's just been so involved in doing little bit of everything for the team. It's pretty crazy. He's always been an important player though, hasn't he? When he's been injured, they've not been as threatening or dominant. Ever since they signed him, he's always been one of those guys who can bring the best out in the team. But I think we're seeing something a little bit special from him at the moment. If he can continue this run of form deep into it, especially when it's not like Roger Tui versus Shaq, who isn't maybe getting as much credit as he has done ordinarily, but he's not playing any worse, It's just that other guys are playing well around him, so it doesn't look like he's just carrying the burden all on his own. He's still got, he would have had 200 plus meters in that game, wouldn't he? And the fella who stood out though, beyond those obvious ones, is when Cody Nikorima can run. he's just such a different player, right? Like when he actually takes it upon himself to attack the line and try get outside his marker and stuff, and like it's a game changer for the way he plays. Yeah.
Yes, the nugget there is what I dished up in our email newsletter. So this is the type of shit you might get in the email newsletter. It's just examples of what kind of runs he does. So last week against the Penrith Panthers, I put in a couple of screenshots where Nikorima ran into a cul-de-sac. So he got the ball. He had, a centre and a winger outside him, Hayes Perham and Adam Pompey, and Nikorima just ran on an angle towards the sideline, and nothing happened because he was running in an angle to the sideline. Like, yeah, he could have turned Perham under, and stuff like that, but it's the idea and the concept of running direct and playing north and south, because it's great for Nikorima to run, but you don't want Nikorima running into cul-de-sacs. You don't want Nikorima running sideways. You want Nikorima running north and south, which is what happened against the Dragons. You'll remember wildcard when Nikorima got that massive line break. That came from a dummy half run where he just ran. He threw a dummy for McInnes and then took advantage of the space behind the ruck. Then against the Panthers, he gets the ball at first. Against the Cowboys, he gets the ball at first receiver and it was an amazing play when you think about it. He steps as he catches the ball, left foot step, back in behind the ruck. So there's two common factors that Nikorima's good runs had. They were north and south. He just ran downfield, and they also targeted the area around the ruck. So Nikorima running the footy is very important. Most important is what they always say about Kieran Foran. Kieran Foran plays incredibly direct. So when he runs the footy, he's running north and south. And he's got some footwork, got some toughness at the line, bit of skill at the line to cause problems as well. But Kieran Foran's reputation was built on being a direct half. As long as Nikorima's running north and south, happy days. And that's where the beauty is for the Warriors. And it's also quick play the balls. So Nikorima's try against the Cowboys came from a Tohu Harris play the ball right in the middle of the field. Now, a quick play the ball in the middle of the field, that's a recipe to expose the gap around the ruck. And that's what Nikorima did. So, shout out Nikorima. The other player here, wildcard, and this might open up our NRL conversation. I always feel a bit rough after good Warriors games highlighting individuals because, statistically, obviously Petahiku 3 tries, 16 runs, 164 meters. The stats for all these dudes are great, so check out the stats if you do want to look at that. Someone like Gerard Beale flies under the radar. He's soaring under the radar, wildcard. Just his work at centre. I think he had a misread or a bad missed tackle that led to one of the Cowboys' tries. But he surprisingly makes meters. He's surprisingly ruthless and rugged out there on the edge. So I do like Gerard Beale as well. So shout out to them. Shout out to all the players, to be honest. Good effort. But the one who really caught my eye was Pawasa Fa'amasili. He had 8 runs for 89 meters, which is almost 11 runs. It's just a bit over 11 meters per run, which is fantastic. I'm not sure if what's 36 divided by 8 wildcard?
4. No, 4.2, something like that.
4 point something. So Farmasili, his 8 runs, he averaged 4 point something post contact meters, which is pretty impressive. But
4.5. Sorry,
it's more about the eye test. Oh, just check out this wildcard. Tohu Harris had the fastest play the ball of the Warriors forwards. So that's my point there. Fastest average play the ball, and then think about Tohu Harris having 3 play the balls from which a try was scored on the following play. The eye test, though.
Is that a stat they can measure? Where do you get that stat from?
You just scroll across on the NRL. On the
NRL,
like all the average stuff.
I'm going to have a peek at those. That's some crazy, like... I love it when the numbers get deep into, like... Because it's so easy to take... I was looking at a thing where someone was claiming that Chris Wood had the best XG rating in the Premier League. And I looked it up on another thing and it was different. And then I looked at the dude's comments and it was a bunch of people being like, that's not true. Look at this one. It says it's Mo Salah or whoever. And Chris Wood isn't even in the top 10. And he's like, well, you know, different outlets have different ideas of what character. And it's like, well, okay, so it's a completely inconsistent stat. Okay, whatever. But like when you can get into situational things, that's when it gets interesting. Because then you can apply, not just relying on the numbers, you can apply how does this situation affect the gameplay? How does it affect like the tactics that they had coming into it? Like that's where you get real funky with the stats. I like that.
Yeah, you're giving a bit too much credit to the NRL stats because all the average stuff I've got to do myself. So you got to do the division to find out average run meters. You got to do the division yourself to find out average post contact meters. But I'm the only one.
Well, they're not going to do it all for you.
I'm the only one who talks about average meters per run. So that's just my insight, and I find that far more important because everyone says like, "Oh, he had a big game. He ran for over 100 meters." If you're taking 20 runs and you're making over 100 meters, it's not so good. But if you've got 5 runs and you're making 100 meters, fucking hell, you're amazing. You're making big meters. And then the NRL, they just list the average play the ball speed for that game. So you can't, like, to the best of my knowledge, there's nowhere that tells you, like, who has the fastest play the ball in the NRL. That's kind of all anecdotal. But in this game against the Cowboys, Tohu Harris had an average play the ball speed of 2.79 seconds. Every other Warriors forward, so not including the hookers, but the big boppers, they all had play the ball speeds over 3 seconds. So Tohu Harris has the fastest average play the ball of the Warriors forwards, and he did so with the most runs. 17 runs. So that's exactly what you want. Most runs, most play the balls, also the fastest play the ball speed. I digress. Poasa Fa'amasili. Not sure, the eye test here, wildcard, because Fa'amasili doesn't look overly big, but when he ran the footy, he's quick. And you're just watching this dude flash through the middle. He's powerful, he's stocky, he's a bit of a unit, and I can see Poasa Fa'amasili offering great value to the Warriors during his time at the Warriors. Now that I'm seeing him more as a player, I think he's the best forward coming off the bench of the group of Carl Lawton coming on a hooker, King Vuniyayawa, Jack Murchie, and Fa'amasili. Fa'amasili added the most impact, which this leads me to open up our NRL discussion here, Wildcard, because I was watching the Roosters, and I'm watching the 2 Morris brothers run around from the Roosters, and so they had one Morris brother, I don't know who, and then the other one wanted to leave Cronulla Sharks earlier this season to go join the Roosters, and I view that as like one of the brothers saying like, fuck, you got to come to the Roosters, bro. Like, they're doing some neck level shit. It's amazing at the Roosters. You need to come here. And then what do you know? One of the Morris brothers, he's pushing out for an exit at the Sharks to go join the Roosters. Roosters signed Flanagan, the halfback, and then all you heard after the Roosters signed Flanagan was the Roosters trying to sign Bronson Xerri. And I think, obviously, everyone knows what Bronson Xerri could do on a footy field. Like, he's bit of a gun, but I think just in this imaginary world I'm creating, with that idea around the Morris brothers, I think Flanagan might have arrived at the Roosters and then, told his mate, holy shit, Roosters are a bit neck level, they're doing some different shit here, you should come over. Now Bronson Xerri got into his own shitstorm, so that didn't pan out, but I say all that, wildcard, to paint this picture of the Roosters being a club where people go to the Roosters and they really like being at the Roosters. Whether it's how the Roosters look after their player, the style of footy they're using. Everyone talks about the Roosters' salary cap sombrero, but the Roosters aren't paying big money for Pawasa Fa'amasili. They're not paying big money for Sitili Tuponuia. They're not paying big money for Lindsay Collins, who has been fantastic for the Roosters. Like, these are some very good players who aren't necessarily on big money, but they love being at the Roosters. I'll throw a little shot at the Dragons here because since my barrage last week, Wildcard, about players wanting to leave the Dragons, then Isaac Luke actually left the Dragons, and I think there was another player, maybe Tristan Saylor's name popped up, or stuff like that. So you've got an example of players wanting to leave the Dragons, as I articulated last week, now with the Isaac Luke situation as well. Compared it to the Roosters, everyone wants to, as soon as you have a sniff of what the Roosters are like, from an outside perspective, players really want to be at the Roosters. So I come back around to Fa'amasili because I feel like no matter how good Fa'amasili is for the Warriors, he'll go back to the Roosters. And I think it would take a extreme scenario of Fa'amasili being super duper amazing and having a real, genuine, legit impact on the Warriors, which he shows signs of doing against the Cowboys, to take him out of the Roosters. The Roosters really look after their players, especially, I think, the players from Aotearoa. So there's no way Tokiaho will leave the Roosters anytime soon. There's no way Isaac Liu will leave the Roosters anytime soon. There's no way Joseph Manu's going to leave the Roosters anytime soon. They love it there. And Fa'amasili was recruited by the Roosters. And the only thing that I can imagine coming into factor here is Fa'amasili getting game time. If the Warriors can give him the game time all season, that's the best chance of Fa'amasili staying with the Warriors. But if there's game time at the Roosters, I think a lot of people view the Roosters as a very comfortable, cozy, enlightening situation, whether it's the type of footy they play, their level of professionalism, being coached by Trent Robinson, any other extra goodies, I don't know, but players want to be at the Roosters, and all of that adds up to this Fa'amasili situation with the Warriors that is incredibly interesting.
Because seemingly the better he plays, the more likely he is to then get minutes at the Roosters as well. So it's not really like a corresponding situation almost. Like he would have to play well, but below a threshold for the Warriors to have him in that sort of possibilities as well, which is a strange one to sort of think about. I don't think, why would you stay at the Warriors unless you feel like you're in just the perfect situation? The Roosters are a team that is the best at recruiting probably at the moment. I don't think their sort of junior ranks as sort of because it's an obvious joke that they just sign all the good players sort of thing. It actually kind of reminds me of Bayern Munich and Germany, something I've been thinking about the last couple of weeks actually, as Sarpreet Singh just keeps sitting on the bench for them, and it's like, on the one hand, it's annoying because it's like, you had a sub up your sleeve. Why didn't you just chuck Sarpreet Singh out there, give him 2 minutes at the end of the game kind of thing? You could have done that. On the other hand, it's like, this is Bayern Munich. The minutes don't come cheaply. There's a reason you're at a club like that, and it's just stacked with talent, and there are a lot of very good players who have come through the Bayern Academy, but they also are the richest club in Germany who can buy all the best players from other clubs in Germany. You think of borderline their best player, Robert Lewandowski, the chance of breaking the Bundesliga goal-scoring mark. I think he's probably a little bit off the pace at this point. He's missed the last game, suspended. But where'd they get him from? They bought him from Borussia Dortmund when he was the best goal scorer in the league for them, for their closest rivals. Okay, we'll just sign their best player, bring him to us. He can be our best player, strengthens us, weakens them at the same time. It's a very Bayern Munich thing to do. But that's sort of the way you act as a powerhouse club. I mean, it's easy to just say, oh, well, they're just in a situation where they can just buy the best players. But it's what you do with them as well. It's how you integrate them. It's putting in the culture which allows those players to come to this club and then continue to get better. Like, not to fall off the pace just because you're suddenly getting paid a little bit more. Whether you're even getting paid that much more isn't necessarily like... Players also just want to play with the best players, so it's not necessarily a matter of going to the highest offer. It's going to the best club and that kind of thing. Like, it's a lot to think about in those kind of things. I will say shout out to Kieran Foran, though, for scoring with about 15 minutes to go in that game last night, because up until that point, the Roosters had scored 95 points in a row. With their, 95 points for them, 0 points for their opponents over the course of, like, can't remember how long it was. Obviously, they won 59-0 against the Broncos, and then they were big up against the Dogs. I suppose you can add a little bit on whatever the previous game was. Like, they went on this crazy run of scoring, and then Kieran Foran broke it with a cheeky little try, which just you stop them from getting to their 100. It reminded me a lot of just the other day. I was watching. It was on the weekend after I got back from football, and there was, how Sky Sport have been rolling through their Australian cricket archives, because it's about the only thing they've got left at the moment, is rolling through old Australian cricket games, and they happened to have the one on where Daniel Vittori got Shane Warne out for 99, and I didn't realise it was the same game as when we had the 4 Centurions in the first innings, and which I used to have a poster of. I don't know if you remember, they used to do those old, like, instead of match programs, they'd do like a tour program, and when you went to the cricket, you could, $20 or whatever, get yourself the tour program, and they'd often have like posters or whatever. I had one of those which was a poster of that innings, and it was like, it was Adam Perori, Nathan Astle, Stephen Fleming, and Lou Vincent. I think those were the 4 guys who scored hundreds, and it's like one of them in each corner kind of thing. I just remember that. I might have to go dig that up and see if I still have it somewhere. But it reminded me of that, watching old Warney get out for 99. I've gone on a couple tangents with that though, so we might want to bring it back, wheel the spaceship back down and through the atmosphere and into Earth territory.
Coming back to Earth will be a beautiful way to wrap up another episode of the Nichecast, but I do have one little stat here, wildcard, to finish with. You mentioned old mate Foran, right? And we've talked about stats and we've talked about running the footy. So I think this is a really good example of perhaps how deep you have to go to understand what's actually happening. So what do people say about Shawn Johnson? Oh, he needs to run the footy. Similar to what you said about Nikorima. Like, if you've got that kind of running ability, surely run the footy. So you look at Shawn Johnson. Oh, he had 14 runs. Holy shit. But the issue here isn't the amount of runs that Shawn Johnson did. Because Shawn Johnson's 14 runs... Now, this isn't... I'm definitely not beating up on Shawn Johnson. I really like Shawn Johnson. And Shawn Johnson's game has expanded far beyond just being a lethal runner of the footy. And I think that's what a lot of people overlook with his development as a rugby league player. But Shawn Johnson's 14 runs amounted to 5.85 meters per run. So he had 82 meters from 14 runs. Now, you mentioned Kieran Foran. He only had 9 runs, but he had 87 meters. So he made 9.66 meters per run. So Shawn Johnson had way more runs, 14 runs for only 5.85 meters per run. Kieran Foran, 9 runs for 9.66 meters per run. So one could look at that and be like, Shawn Johnson ran the footy, he had 14 runs, that's great. But did those runs create anything? Did those runs create a quick play the ball? Did those runs create opportunities for other players? Now, this isn't foolproof, but I would strongly suggest that averaging 5.85 meters per run does not suggest a lethal running game. Kieran Foran, on the other hand, a bit more selective with his runs and more dynamic with his runs, and those runs have a greater impact on the game. There you go.
Yeah, I don't even remember Shawn Johnson doing hardly anything in that game. So the fact that he had 14 runs is a surprise to me. That makes me think he just got caught at like dummy half a couple times, or rushing up on the first receiver or something, because he didn't have a massive impact on that game, to be honest.
And that's why the Dragons won wildcard.
Hey!
Came up against the crappy Cronulla Sharks team.
Well, we got an even crappier Gold Coast Titans team next week, so there we go.
Oh, I'd love to see Moeaki Fotuaika absolutely steamroll the Dragons forward pack. That would just make me happy.
It's not out of the question.
Well, we'll wait and see. We'll pop up for another podcast later in the week, as is per our recipe at the moment, where we'll touch on a few other sporting matters. The Wildcards Flying Kiwis desk is a buzz with action. We do have New Zealand cricket contracts, more contracts, so like team contracts, Auckland Aces and Wellington Firebirds and Jeet Raval on the move, and shit's hitting the fan in the cricket realm of Aotearoa as well, and any other Kiwi sporting topics. We do have a Kiwi UFC fight booked, Dan Hooker versus Justin Poirier, not this weekend, but the next weekend, so we might talk about that as well. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Love yourselves. Love each other. And just spread the good vibes. Chit-chat.